Hello, my name is Ray Hill. The name of the program is Public Affairs, Public Access. It is Houston Media Source's effort to bring you thought-provoking programming about issues, contemporary issues that affect your lives. Many of the things we discuss here are issues where there is public debate ongoing and the final decisions have not been made, or the final process that have previously been announced have not been accomplished. We're very lucky today to have a very special guest. Attorney Joe Flores is being Skyped in from Corpus Christi. Hello, Joe.
Hi, how are you, Ray? Thanks for having me.
Joe is an attorney. And Joe, could you tell us something about the nature of your practice and how broad it is?
Absolutely. Over half my practice is in criminal law and also in state and federal here in the Southern District, from Houston all the way down to Brownsville. So I see a lot of criminal cases, nonviolent and violent.
And so you represent defendants in these courts, which not only may have the legal problems with the case in front of them, but also problems like immigration?
Absolutely. Some of the cases called 1324 through 1326, Title 8, are illegal entry cases, alien smuggling cases, and arms cases. And often individuals who enter the country repeatedly on an illegal basis.
Now, your territory is actually pretty broad. You're based in Corpus Christi, but you practice law along the border.
Absolutely correct. From the Southern District encompasses Houston all the way down to Brownsville. So it's a good 300-400 mile area, and people are just headed to Houston when they enter here illegally. And that's only one of the cases. The drug cases, as you all know, the federal cases are just ridiculously long. And I think that that's part of the reason I came on, to end mass incarceration.
Well, as a matter of fact, the reason I invited you on is so that we could discuss some of the fluctuations that's going on in the actual legal arena. There's some federal plan to reduce the use of mandatory minimum sentencing. And there is some thought into seeking alternatives to incarceration with innovative courts, at least on the state level, of having drug courts and other specialty courts to look at these issues and these crimes differently. Plus the fact we've got the big thing going on around the country where there is some substantive reform going on in Colorado and Oregon and Washington State, and now some other states that are dealing with changing the laws to decriminalize some classes of drugs. I know that's a lot of territory, but you don't get to decide who knocks on your door, do you?
That's right. Often, you know, the people that come for help, they're already inside. It's the family, predominantly women. The matriarch of the family often comes and tries to get their son or their husband or their nephew out of jail, often checkpoint cases. And, you know, you're quite right. The federal is way different from state, too. I mean, they don't have a bonding company. Federal does its own bonding. So you've got to put up a title to your house. You got to put up some other significant property to get somebody out. And if they take a run, you eat the bond. And they're very strict on that.
What kinds of cases would you say that you were going to court for right now?
We're looking at, again, primarily at drug cases and illegal entry. Those are about the majority of federal cases that I get called on because of the geographical area and everybody trying to come in through the border and entering. Often you'll get, I don't handle the material witnesses. I do handle either the person who's repeat offended, try to enter and looking for work, or somebody who helps smuggle them in. And sometimes it's a combination of the two. Somebody to pay their fee to enter this country, which can go up to about $4,500 from Mexico if you're a Mexican citizen, can try to whittle away at their fee by becoming a guide if they've been here before. And then, of course, the federal government hits them with more charges for that.
And your opposition in all these cases is U.S. Attorney General's office.
That's correct. And boy, they've got the resources and they do a good job of prosecuting the cases.
And they would inherently have more resources at their access than you have as a practicing criminal defense lawyer.
That is correct. You know, I've got as much resource as the client can pay with fees and things, but a lot of the times it's an uphill battle. The conviction rates in federal court can be higher than 80% on some cases, and just the taint that illegal immigration of undocumented workers has right now in South Texas. You know, case in point, a highly publicized alien smuggling ring consisting of college students. One of them that I represented, while doing the jury selection, I was allowed to ask a few questions. And I asked, how many of y'all already think they're guilty just because of the type of crime? And about a third raised their hands, which is, you know, and that's after the federal judge told them.
Admonished them on the presumption of innocence.
Correct.
Well, actually, a lot of these cases are emotionally charged cases.
When I asked why, some of the ranchers said, I'm just sick and tired of them tearing up my fences, my property, my resources. I've almost come close to shooting them. I thought they were robbers on my land. And, a lot of them have a lot of anger about it.
And those are the people who compose these jury panels from that area.
That's correct. When Corpus Christi Division will be all the way to Falfurrias, 80 miles south, all the way to Rockport, around this area, about an 80-mile radius. So it's huge. And, of course, Houston has a tremendous area of a couple of million people in their section.
Okay. So do you get those juries down in courts closer to the border?
Yes, in Brownsville as well. And I think that you have the same sentiment. There's a split camp there that even among a Mexican-American community that says, okay, there is a hypocrisy here that if we put the same boss that hired them, the construction boss that picks them up at Home Depot, or the person hiring them at a slaughterhouse, if we put them in the same jail cell, our stance on immigration would quickly change. If you put the overseer in jail with them, they're coming over here and they're bringing drugs over here for a reason. There's a need.
Well, there's a market. There's a market, and where there's a market, capitalism will fill that market. That's not a new idea. The thing that concerns me is that you just brought up an interesting point. It is illegal to hire someone who is not documented.
That's right, and it's seldom ever prosecuted, and I've brought that up many, many times in front of federal judges. I posted on Facebook. I had one U.S. attorney one time pipe up and say, yeah, but we do prosecute them. I said, how many cases?
Yeah, how many cases?
Yeah, and I could count them on my hand over a decade and change that I've ever seen. I thought maybe one out of 1,000 cases I've seen that they were prosecuting an affluent, predominantly white boss. Farmer.
Have you ever represented such a person?
Never.
So they don't come. They don't look up your shingle and knock on your door.
No, absolutely not, because they don't get prosecuted, and I'll go on record to say that. They don't get prosecuted. They just don't. They'll prosecute the alien entering. They'll prosecute the guide, but they're not going to prosecute the employer from this side. Seldom, if ever. They might get dinged or fined or raided, but I really have never seen many employers. Certainly not Walmart that came out on the news on it. Nobody got busted there that was hiring.
No handcuff marks on white wrists.
Oh, or Mexican wrists that happen to be American. None that are hiring these people. They're not getting busted unless you are part of a smuggling ring. Then you're, a target, a person of interest. But if you're a big corporation or a Hispanic, Black, or white American that is hiring these illegal or undocumented workers, you're not going to get prosecuted. The chances are very slim.
Did you notice any change after Eric Holder's speech before the American Bar Association, where he announced he was taking the weight marker off of drug indictments to cut short the mandatory minimum application?
It really is just starting to, the millstones of God grind slowly and exceedingly small. Now people are saying, well, I'll get 2 points off, for nonviolent drugs. There's hope here in November, but really we're not seeing anything boots on the ground yet. There's a lot of rhetoric, there's a lot of talk, but right now the federal judges that I encounter are still being conservative on the sentences, and a lot of them, unless somebody does what they call a 5K1 or cooperate Rule 35 after sentencing, the federal system's set up for you to squeal and then you get some time off, but seldom more than a third or near a half, seldom a half. That's what I'm seeing.
Yeah, I don't want to get too far off that subject, but remind me to get back to that squealing thing, because that's in actual practice. How these laws are enforced is to turn everybody into snitches.
Yes, correct.
And so, but I don't want to forget that, because that's a valuable part of this story. But Eric Holder did, in fact, give that speech to the Bar Association, but that did not in any way diminish the judge's discretion in sentencing, did it?
No, and in the guidelines, there's our mandatory minimums, which I just find absolutely ridiculous. You've got a girl that loves a guy who lives in Mexico, the baby mama, and she goes down there and he says, do me a favor, bring over this car. There might be something in the tires, just don't look nervous. She gets caught, she's 22, has a kid. They find a couple of pounds of meth in there. Mandatory minimums. Unless she cooperates, she's going to go to the clink at least a decade. First-time offender, no matter what. Judges' hands are tied, Ray.
But that's under mandatory minimum. But even if you remove the mandatory minimum, that judge could still do the same thing.
Correct. And the guideline ranges, I like to call it guideline-itis, where the judges get used to sticking by the guidelines. And they do pretty much stay within the guidelines. And if they do, they really don't have a lot to worry about getting appealed. Unless they depart up or they depart down a lot. You seldom see a departure down, the government appealing that, but sometimes they do. But the judges do have a lot of discretion short of mandatory minimums, but you don't see that discretion being used. You see this guideline-itis, where it's just let me assess the punishment within that guideline, which between rock and powder cocaine, night and day.
That enormous difference in that, and that usually falls down racial lines.
And weight too, and weight of drug.
Weight of drugs. So the weight of drug, even if we removed the weight marker, the judge says, all right, for the last 20 years, I have been giving this much time for this much dope, and I want to be consistent and not give these people a break that I did not give previous people.
Yes, and part of that is justice. I think, and I'm not trying to kiss up. I'm just saying I think the federal judges do a good job, but federal sentences are stiff. We give 3 times the amount of jail time that they do in Europe for drug offenses as Canada. We're only 5% of the world's population, but we incarcerate 25%. What's wrong with this picture?
Yeah, right. Clearly. Now I want to get back to that snitch thing. Now,
sure.
suppose I get busted for possession of meth, and they carry me off to jail, and somebody from the FBI's office, Justice Department, comes and visit me in jail. The first thing he's going to want to know who I do dope with, right?
Correct. And a lot of the time, these people that are cooperating are putting their life on the line. Now, if you ask any DEA agent, any federal agent, oh, nobody's ever been killed. Nobody's ever been retaliated against. Nobody's ever been threatened that cooperates. They'll try to say that. But, I've got guys in prison that are, that they find out they're talking. They're going to be retaliated against. There is no doubt. And a word gets around, the mental and psychological bullying. You're somebody's, guy in there doing their
old lady or some, yeah, right. We know about prison culture.
Sure, and prison culture is a jungle, and the only way you're going to cooperate, and there's no guarantee. With one little variance on what you said compared to five other people that cooperated, they could say, "No, we're not going to afford you anything." That's what makes the
Or
system.
even if you cooperate and try to, give them a long list of names and anything, that's really no guarantee that you're going to get any break when it comes to sentencing, is it?
It's all up to the U.S. Attorney's discretion. And if they say, well, I don't believe him, the case agent doesn't believe him, just doesn't sound honest enough, we're not going to recommend a departure down on sentencing, and the judge doesn't have to give it. In fact, the judge's hands are tied if the U.S. attorney doesn't suggest for them to lower it and that he's cooperated. The judge will just give in the guidelines. And I had one guy, I had him down to 8 years for cooperating. He got in a little scuffle to defend himself all over coffee. Mm-hmm. And the judge said, well, he's a violent offender now. And I said, Judge, not a violent offender. He got it. Well, he is violent. He got in a fight. He broke his plea deal, told him not to break the law. He did while in prison, waiting for his sentence. And he ended up doing 23 years, not 8, just because of a little scuffle in prison, which I thought we appealed it up to the Supreme Court and it was affirmed. So that is just absolutely ridiculous. The discretion some judges have, some judges sentence by video people to 20, 30 years, which I think is just reprehensible. And I've objected to that. And, well, in an indirect way, I've got retaliated against for it. I'm not popular in some courts because I said, well, wait a minute, you're going to send somebody 20, 30 years to jail. Don't do it from your vacation home, which they can do it. But I don't think, my guy said, which, the judge was great, said, if you object, let me know. And the guy objected. So still got a pretty stiff sentence. But she did sentence him in person, but you just had to wait. She was out of town. But the guy wanted to look her in the eye. And a lot of the times, a great judge gave it within the guidelines, but there was no real incentive to give below the guidelines. And so it's just a kind of harsh system in the federal prison system.
I'd like to remind our viewers that the program is open to telephone calls. The number is across the bottom of your screen. If you don't have your glasses on, that's 713-807-1794. My name is Ray Hill. The name of the program is Public Affairs, Public Access. Our guest today is Joe Flores. Joe is a practicing attorney, and he and I talk about reducing the prison population on a regular basis. Wait a minute, you're a lawyer. You make a living off people going to prison. Why is that not a conflict of interest?
Well, because, and that's a good point, but when I swore an oath to defend my client zealously, that means trying to get them the best sentence possible. And the federal system, the way it's set up is for stiff sentences. And a lot of the time, setting up these unfair guidelines that just say, well, you're going to get within these guidelines and that's all you're going to get, ties the hands of the judge sometimes, even though they have discretion, they get used to it, guideline-itis. And the lawyer themselves just kind of shrug and say, well, you're going to get within the guideline. Now, I've been successful in several cases where I say, well, I'm going to think outside the box and argue different things and say, this is an isolated case. This case cries out for a different sentence, for a lower sentence. It's an atypical case. The guy just did a dumb thing one time. There are different, his mother's sick. I had one judge release the guy a year early because his wife was pregnant and gave him time served, and he went back to Mexico. And I said, Judge, I don't want his wife who's hemorrhaging and having a child right now with 2 kids around her in a hut dying and have the blood on my hands and he not being able to go home and he's the sole caretaker. And the judge had the mercy and compassion to let him go. So it's not always the federal
So you run into that.
Yeah, there is hope. I tell people in the federal system, there is hope. But the way things are set up, I just tell my clients, please don't talk about your case inside there because, as you said, the snitching, you get rewarded for snitching. So somebody pretending to be your friend will call up the U.S. attorney and say, I've got information on a certain guy,
Yeah.
and twist all your words, and
Yeah,
then
and
you get stiff sentence.
they call in their prosecutor and say, let's make a deal because I've got some additional information that I picked up in the cell block. How reliable is that? You talk about a conflict of interest thing. In my conversations with the American Law Institute, it occurred to me to pitch the idea that weight-based mandatory minimums meant that the people they were actually locking up was not the real drug criminals, but the mules.
Correct.
So you have, go ahead. You can explain that because you deal with those kinds of cases.
Correct. I mean, what we're doing, the war on drugs, is an absolute failure. I hate to say it, but $3 billion down a sinkhole, because you're never going to catch the guys who are the real distributors. You catch the mules. You punish the mules who are just carrying it to, and all the cop shows you see, minimal amounts of marijuana, big deal, smoking pot in a park, and they catch a guy with a joint or two. Is this really what we need to be doing instead of chasing the big guys with all our resources? And so you're putting these mules, I've had more than one young person just do a dumb thing, and then they're looking at 10 or 15 years for methamphetamine. It's just not just. You're throwing away somebody's life, and I'm not by any means a bleeding heart, but you're just throwing away a 22-year-old's life. And when you let them out, they've got a felony. They can't live in public housing. They can't receive public aid whatsoever. And to an ultra right winger, they say, well, good. But I'll say, no, not good.
Not good at all.
And if you're a right winger, we're paying $40,000 to $60,000 a year for a hot and a cot, 3 hots and a cot a day, if they're healthy.
Yeah,
that's a lot of money to the taxpayer.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have some kid that's got to buy insurance for his car, and somebody said, look, I'll give you $600 if you'll drive this truck from McAllen to Corpus Christi. And he needs that money.
Correct. The incentive is there from alien smuggling to drugs. And I tell you, alien smuggling is surpassing drugs as the most lucrative, because people want to come up here and work. And right now in Mexico, what we don't want to admit is a civil war, and people are refugees coming over here. And some may differ with that, but try going to Mexico and seeing what it's like over there. I just came back from Mexico City. It is no walk in the park. And 43 students who just lost their lives. This is lawlessness.
And the government was involved in that, the local government.
That's correct. So we need to show that compassion. We put billions into Iraq and Afghanistan, and we didn't invest in our own hemisphere. And now we're seeing the price that we pay are children that are coming over here, in tens of thousands of children. And we're seeing people coming over here, and then the drug trade has just gone. I've had people forced to mule and come over here, forced with their own children as hostages. And they'll say, carry it over and meet this guy. And that's just part of it. They kidnap their children, they force them to mule. You try to convince a U.S. attorney of that, but it's nothing but fact.
You got drugs and coming one way and money and guns going the other way.
That's right. And, they were looking at Operation Fast and Furious, where it was shown that it's coming out, some embarrassing things for our government, that maybe there were some guns being sent down to Mexico. Go figure. We've had a history of, we're arms dealers for the world. Finding that out is potentially embarrassing. There's not enough facts that I have other than what's come across, and pretty reliable, that was one operation, and tons here at the gun shows. Houston, the gun shows at George R. Brown take down what they call cuernos, the AKs, because they look like horns, with the way they're shaped. Sure. Cuernos in Spanish. And they're taking down droves of hundreds of AK-47s.
Come here to the gun show and buy an unlimited amount, and then you find holes in the border going the other way.
Legal waitress at a taqueria goes there. The boyfriend is an illegal, making tons of money selling to the cartel. Selling guns over there. Guns going over, drugs coming back. You're right.
Joe, Do you find the practice of law frustrating?
At times, but if a lot of the time as a Hispanic, Mexican American lawyer, people say there are too many lawyers in this country. I say, well, not enough Mexican ones, that's for sure. Severely underrepresented class, and you've got this culture there that's Spanish speaking, and you don't have Spanish speakers, or you have some that are very poor that poorly, able to speak it. You really don't have that advocacy there. And I find it frustrating. I find it frustrating in the federal system, the harsh sentences, and the way, we're just wasting money by incarcerating these people, these young people. Most of the recidivism rate over 35, it just plummets. And we send these people away, till they're 50. We've given away they could have done something wonderful with their life. People like yourself and others, great friends of mine, that have contributed so much in a lifetime to help people. They're just sitting there in jail, wasting time, wasting potential.
Well, yeah, I was in prison Saturday. I went up to talk to the veterans incarcerated group at the Pulaski unit. An enormous prison full of people. And the people that make it to the Pulaski are people doing big time. And so here I am talking to Vietnamese and Hispanic and Black and Anglo inmates. It seems hopelessness has set in on most of them. But before we get too far away about the issue of Hispanic lawyers, I actually knew and worked with Jose Rojo, who was one of the first practicing criminal lawyers in Harris County. They wouldn't even let him intern in the DA's office because of his heritage. So he had to get trial experience in traffic court and work his way up. Bless his heart, he was a close friend. He died a couple of years ago. But he talked about being a pioneering Spanish surnamed lawyer. And he died, 4 years ago. So it hasn't been too long since there were no Spanish surname lawyers.
That's correct. 40, 50 years ago, my dad had a picture of a sign that said no dogs or Mexicans allowed. And that was 4 years after the Civil Rights Act and the year that I was born. And my dad said, never forget that we fought really hard to get rights for Hispanics. Blacks aren't the only ones who paid. We did too. And our land was taken away and we were oppressed down here. And a lot of discrimination, even today, as
Joe,
a Hispanic lawyer.
We've got a viewer that wants to call in, so put him up. Hello to caller.
Yes, hello.
Hi, you're on the air.
Thank you. I was calling because I understand that I think it's only felony charges that inmates, when they get released from prison, they lose the right to vote. So I'm curious, is that just felony?
Well, stop.
Misdemeanor?
Stop.
And/or has anything been done to change that?
Stop. In Texas, a convicted felon can register and vote when his or her time is up. And they call that bill the Ray Hill bill in the Texas Senate when it passed in 1985. Now, if you're under a sentence or on a final conviction, probation, or parole, you cannot vote as long as you're serving that sentence. But the day it is over, you can legally register to vote, and since the requirement to run public office is registered voter in the district, you can run for public office. I've run for city council and justice of the peace several times.
Do you know if that applies to the rest of the country?
No, it does not apply in most of the country. Massachusetts has good laws. Wisconsin has good laws. Minnesota has good laws. But in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, or Florida, If you're a convicted felon, the only way you can get the voting right back is to get a pardon from the governor.
Or move to another state.
Move to Texas. We'd love to have you. If you were convicted in another state and you moved to Texas, you can register.
Well, good work there, Ray. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, sir.
Joe,
I'm right here, Ray.
you want to add to that?
No, thank you, first of all, for everything you did on that bill, because, the way that it was one strike, you're out. Never carry a firearm, never vote. One mistake when you're 18 or 19-year-old kid can cost you the rest of your life. And, the conversation turns on, well, this person should never run for office. This person should never vote again. There has to be a limit that you've got to say, we can, or rehabilitation is just a joke. It means nothing. It's just punishment. And that's not what I believe Texas is about. I think that we need to rehabilitate more, not just sentence people and throw them away.
Ever since I started doing Execution Watch, that would carry me to Livingston to interview people on death row. And I have a theory that we never execute the person who did the crime. We execute the same physical body that the person occupied when the crime was done, but without any effort to rehabilitate them. Time on death row changes a man from at one time being a danger to not being a danger anymore. So we're killing people that are literally don't have that continuing threat requirement to practice executions. That's just my observation.
Well, and a lot of the time, many of the people, it's minorities that are an overwhelming amount of the people that are on death row. The other issue is, how much do we spend exponentially, even if you're on the right-wing side or a fiscal conservative, quote unquote. You have to look at the expense of housing somebody on death row and the appeals and everything else that goes along with it. So we've got to really, really critically look at what we're doing.
The cost of incarceration is security. Those folks are not living in luxury. They're not eating gourmet foods. The cost of incarceration is security. If you're on death row or if you're in solitary confinement for gang membership, the cost of your incarceration increases exponentially. If you're old and you have a lot of health problems, the cost of incarceration increases exponentially. The fact of the matter is that if we just had an orientation program for people going into prison, so that someone has said, look here, son or young lady, your job description is the same as the warden's. You are here to make this big, unmanageable plantation operation operate smoothly. And inasmuch as you do that, you will be rewarded. Inasmuch as you hinder that, you will be punished, perhaps severely, and you'll wind up staying more time. We could reduce the amount of time people served just by having an orientation program to do that. Correct.
And, we've got so much, and let's just put aside any violent offenders and then just the nonviolent. If we emptied out, I've got a Sheriff Kalen here in Nueces County, Republican with a capital R, who says the war on drugs is a failure. And he says, I want all the pot smokers and the cocaine snorters for personal use under a gram out of my jail.
Sure.
This is a Republican.
He needs the space for people he needs to protect the public from.
Exactly. And he said, now, if we really want to punish them, make them stay home all day long with their mother-in-law. I love this guy, Sheriff Jim Kalen. And he came out, and these Republicans were up in arms. And then they started saying, well, you know what? He's right.
It makes sense.
A real prison sentence is live at home with a mother-in-law. And, there's a sense of, that saves a lot of money. They're bathing themselves. They're feeding themselves. Maybe they could make a living online while they're incarcerated. We've asked for that in the federal system, split sentence, early release, and there has to be alternatives. And that's where we're going with this. With all the technology we've got, there has to be an alternative to this. And I think we're turning the boat around finally, and we're going broke in this country.
Sure.
And I just find it offensive that private prisons are making a ton of cash, and on the and right there on the ticker tape on Wall Street, they're making tons of money. Investors are investing in these prisons for profit. It's just inherently a conflict that home of the free and home of the brave, that we are profiting off our juveniles and our people when it's supposed to be rehabilitation. For-profit prisons don't want to let you out.
Do you recall do you recall that judge in Florida that was sentencing juveniles to private prison, and they found out he was getting kickbacks for the juveniles he was sending there?
May he burn in perdition forever. And
well, he actually got time out of that.
Yes, that made my day, and a Pennsylvanian too, a judge.
Yeah,
made my day.
And those cases were not brought to fore by lawyers. Those cases were brought to fore by journalists.
And that's why, you know, I always say more people should become friends with journalists and also lawyers. I think that what corporations have done and other interest groups have separated people by vilifying all lawyers. Now, some lawyers really deserve it, but by alienating lawyers and vilifying them and making them all bad, then people stay away from them and they don't know their rights, number one. And number two, it allows corporations like these for-profit prisons to get away with things. And people like yourself that come out with these great programming, and journalists are the ones that are really the stopgap, not the lawyers. We're cut in the system. I've done so much by working with people like you, Ray. Social change doesn't come from lawyers within the system. It comes from without, with people that say, you know what, this needs to change, like your relationship with ALI.
Yeah, and ALI, which is basically the Bar Association for Law Professors, if you didn't know what that was, it's only 400 members. You have to be invited to be a member, and they're kind of a grassroots think tank for needed reforms. They came up with a model penal code one time, and in less than a decade, it had passed in every state and jurisdiction in this country. I want to touch on the topic. We were talking earlier about removing the weight marker and the limited effect that had. What about all of those people that were mandatory minimums because of weight that were sentenced prior to Eric Holder's speech at the Bar Association?
Well,
now, go ahead.
Well, I'm in agreement with you that should retroactively apply. There is no doubt. We need to go back and, as you said, because you're correct in saying the judges will say, well, I gave all those other people that sentence. I should continue to do what I'm doing now.
Just to be fair.
Yeah, this should go back retroactively. If they can do that on DWI, that remember when you could get off a DWI conviction in 10 years where it doesn't count and they can't enhance? Well, they passed that law in 2005 that says forever now, retroactively, if you've ever had a DWI and you get a third, it's a felony. Same thing with this weight marker. We need to go back retroactively.
Is that going to require legislation, or does the U.S. Attorney General and his heirs and assigns have the authority to do that on their own?
I think it's a combination of both, and I think that we need to just revamp the whole, or you know what, toss the whole guidelines. The United States sentencing guidelines need to be tossed. They were Spiro Agnew and his bunch and everybody else made these guidelines to make everybody happy. It has to be a combination, and then the proactive United States attorneys need to move forward with this, and judges need to listen. There is not a preclusion from starting to do this and really going back, just like we're doing with taking off 2 points for nonviolent drug offenders for long sentences. It's a start.
It's a start. But, these guidelines, this legislation is inherently a political and political environmental problem. If you've
Absolutely.
got Spiro Agnew and John Mitchell running the show, and they're trying to make Nixon look like the law and order czar of the world. Actually, Nixon was kind of liberal.
Yeah, and you know, and a lot of people say, well, who's Spiro Agnew? You know, the younger people. I was 5, but I learned my history
Yeah.
lessons. They did this for different reasons. Just like nowadays, we're incarcerating people not to protect the public, but to make profits. And there, we have to look at the reasoning behind we're mass incarcerating people while we're militarizing our police and making our police sort of like this military Gestapo type thing. I've got people being searched, thrown into squad cars, all for not carrying insurance. I understand carrying insurance is important, but having your car towed and a housewife never, ever arrested in her life, being tossed in a car with bracelets on, they're crushing her wrists, and being slammed into a police car because of it, something is very wrong with this country when that starts happening.
Well, whenever we began in mass incarceration some almost 2 years ago, I think it was the way it works is that we have organizations in various cities, 26 cities now, and each city has its own Facebook page. And we're at the stage where we're trying to educate one another about the criminal justice system. Because even if you have a son in prison or a husband in prison, you don't know what's going on, and you don't have an idea about the overall picture. In order to bring about a body of people, an army, as Saul Alinsky would put it, to bring about change, and you need, politics is a numbers game. You need people to do that. The first thing you need to do is educate your army about what the issues are. So I'm rocking and rolling. I'm talking to the ALI. I sent them an email, and the president called me back in an hour and a half and said, "You're right. We're with you. We understand that there needs to be major reforms because we locked too many people up for too long a time for too little reason. It ain't working, and we can't afford it." And so then I got a call back from them and said, "Would you mind somebody from the Justice Department lurking on your conversation call?" That person was Eric Holder.
And you know, when we discussed this earlier, I was just so moved by it because I have used that same argument when Eric Holder spoke to ALI. It does matter what he says.
Yes.
Say what you want about him. If you're on one side of the spectrum or the other, he does make sense because it affects all of us. We're all paying for these people that are going away for ridiculous amounts of time, for ridiculous amounts of weight of drugs, and they're not the big wheels. They are just mules, for one, nonviolent offenders. And Justice Stevens said the same thing. It's cruel. You take away hope. You take away everything from somebody, and you don't learn anything in prison other than survival. And those skills that you learn in prison just make you a better criminal when you get out. You know.
Justice Stevens has retired. Eric Holder has announced his resignation. I don't see the incoming Republican Senate in any hurry to replace Eric Holder with anything that looks like, sounds like, thinks like him. So we're in for some rough times ahead. But reform, the pressure for reform is neither a Democrat nor a Republican thing. The pressure for reform is a reality that we have ignored too long.
Correct. Correct. Just like our immigration reform, it all bleeds into it. And we're locking up these undocumented workers.
Right about now, the President of the United States is giving an address. You don't have to run over and catch it. They're going to repeat it over and over and over and over again every news cycle for the next 2 months. So you'll get all the information you need from that. But how does that affect where you are? How does the basic immigration reform of saying parents of American citizens that were born to that family while neither one of them or either one of them was documented, but they live here, they can stay here because of their American citizen child?
You know, just like everybody else, you know, the Latino community, very family oriented, And when you rip apart that family, when you take that mother that's undocumented and she had American-born kids that are going to college, she's lived in the shadows, she gets pulled over for a traffic ticket and gets deported back, and there's no one else to take care of those children, it becomes a burden exponentially. These children are entered into a system through CPS, Child Protective Service. They're put into foster homes, and I've worked with children, and they get in trouble for the littlest indiscretions where we used to get paddled or detention. They'll get thrown in juvie and learn how to be prisoners. And those children are also subject to abuse, sexual, emotional, physical. And that's what happened. We end up paying for it. And that's what happens. It rips families apart, where if you let them stay and work, if they weren't caught, I'm not talking about violent felons. They need to go back. But we're talking about somebody just trying to make a living, these 14 million undocumented workers. And the rhetoric that we are taking away jobs, simply, it's not, it's unfounded. And that these aliens are taking all these benefits and getting all this free stuff, it just not, it just that's not happening. They're lies, because I live it every day. I see it every day down here. And instead of building more walls, we need to build bridges. We've got a workforce that's already here.
Yeah.
They need to pay taxes.
Yeah.
And they need to send their children to school. And the fastest growing population is Latino. And, take Iowa, for instance, setting up all these taquerias, all these businesses. They're the driving force behind the economy.
Well, let's take the ethnic and the immigration issue out of it altogether. If you lock the breadwinner up, you put everybody else in that household on welfare. And it costs over $3,000 to put a $200 welfare check in the hands of that mother.
Correct. And
$3,000 for $200. That's the bureaucratic cost of welfare. How long can we sustain this madness?
I don't think we're sustaining it now. I think that the system is broke. I think there's not enough money. I think people are slipping through the cracks, putting aside ethnicity and race and just looking at it from a colorblind analysis. We've got to stop the incentives for people to stay on welfare, or when we're sending somebody out of the country, a mother, the base of the family or the foundation is the mother or the breadwinner. And when you take that out of the equation, it's mass chaos. The family disintegrates, children are scattered like the wind, and it is just a nightmare. I've seen it too many times. Well, if we had a sensible immigration reform, I think it'd be better.
Actually, I experienced that in my own family, former companion and his wife and baby. I got to thinking about what would life be like for Brandon if Erica dropped him off at the elementary school and got stopped by a constable for a burned out taillight and didn't have a driver's license or papers, because she couldn't get a driver's license because she didn't have papers. And she got shipped off to Mexico. That family would be torn apart. This was during the Bush administration. And it took us 16 months and $30,000 to get the wife and mother of American citizens permanent residence papers. Most of those people can't afford that. There's no way they could afford it. And then she had to live in Querétaro with her mother for that 16 months. And the laws do not take human impact into consideration.
They don't. I've seen, mothers that are 8 months pregnant deported back to war-torn countries just because of that. And I've seen the cruelty of the system where that mother's just going to come back with a papoose. Obviously, again, one side of the equation, we want cheap labor, we want cheap drugs, but then we punish them for the very desire that we created. And that's the hypocrisy of America sometimes, for better or for worse. That's what it amounts to. It's hypocrisy, one-sidedness, and just being short-sighted. These people are going to come back and keep coming back. And someday we might have conditions in this country where we might flee to Canada. You never know when the shoe's on the other foot.
Well, I've been through one of those times. I was national chair of the Student Mobilization Committee to end the war in Vietnam, and I had a lot of members that crossed that northern border trying to seek shelter from the draft. Our conversation today has been with Joe Flores, who's an attorney that practices in a tough territory, Corpus Christi south to the border, what we normally call the Valley. He's a hardworking fellow. I've known him for some time. Joe, the only thing that gives me hope, real hope, is the obvious stupidity that we're doing it wrong. And I don't think that the general public, when they become aware of what's going on, will tolerate it, whether they be Republican, Democrat. You know, we've already got the libertarians going for smaller expenses in this area. And, you know, Wall Street's doing pretty good, but the rest of us, not so much. Banking is prospering and booming, but the rest of us, not so much. We're going to have to deal with that kind of equality. And the next time you and I get together, let's talk about that disproportional inequality in our economic system.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Joe, for being with us. If you don't mind me, I want to talk to those folks in the camera a few minutes about Houston Media Source. Houston Media Source is your public access television station. We're not only television, but we've got a little radio studio, and every Wednesday afternoon at 2 o'clock, I go on the radio, and it's not on the radio with the FM dials and the AM dials. It's in the computer or the internet-connected device. So it's your smartphone, your tablet, or your computer. You go there and you put in www.hmsnetradio.org, and at 2 o'clock, voila, a live voice comes on the air amid of an interesting collection of music, and I talk to you about whatever issue has affected me that day or that week, and we have discussions. I have a telephone so you can call in and join the conversation, just like we have here. Public access television is the cutting edge of relevant media. It is media that you not only can listen to passively, not only can save, you can tape record it or get copies of it and keep it, but you can also participate in it. The very website, www.hmsradio.org, you can sign up, get your own radio program. You can go to hmstv.org, Houston Media Source, and you can come in here and learn how to use these lights and these cameras. You can deal with color and movement and sound to build the kind of broadcast media that you know you need and you want, but nobody else is supplying it. Don't cuss the media. Don't sit there and stare at your television and say, I wish something was on. Create something of value to put on yourself. Houston Media Source. I come in here and I do public affairs, public access at Houston Media Source so that I can talk to you about issues that I think is important for you to think about. Hopefully today's program has been thought-provoking. Hopefully it's not over. Hopefully you're going to think about, why are we locking up the most vulnerable and least involved people in drug cases? Why are we giving them more time simply because they have been paid a few bucks to pack some heavy stuff? Face reality. We live in a democracy. Democracies only work when you are informed and thinking. And for God's sake, I don't care how they change the laws to suppress your vote. It all starts with your being registered to vote. If you're a citizen of this country, a resident of this county and state, you should have a voter registration card in your pocket right this minute. It's your proof of citizenship. It's your proof of belonging. It's your proof of having political power. Votes only and always come one to a box. and yours is worth as much as everybody else's. Just because somebody's spending a lot of money on a campaign doesn't mean you have to be impressed with that. Get to know the people that are on the ballot who you can vote for, and vote always in your own best interest. If it's good for you, it's good for the country. And if you will defend that, our country will work a lot better for all of us. My name is Ray Hill. The name of the program is Public Access, Public Affairs. Thank you for listening. This is going to be shown at odd times in the future. If you say call in, don't do that because we're not live. But I'm glad to have you in the audience, and I hope you'll come back. I'm in here periodically, but I'm on the radio every Wednesday afternoon at 2 p.m. Thank you, and have the nice rest of the day.